What is an ISMS, an Information Security Management System, and why do you need it? That's what this video is about. With an ISMS, information security in a company is managed systematically. That means it's a holistic approach. It's not a program, not a single tool, not a person, not a process. It simply describes everything related to information security in a company. It makes organization controllable. This can refer to customer data, production data, processes, intellectual property, or even personnel information. Most ISMS describe 3 protection objectives. These are the availability of information, meaning that all information, whether it's my customers or the programs I use internally, is always available when I want it to be. That's what it describes. The second protection objective is confidentiality. This is what you usually hear about in the media when it comes to hacker attacks or attackers who want to obtain company information or harm businesses. In ISMS terms, this basically means that it's about stealing information from companies and then using it for their own purposes. And the third protection objective, which is usually mentioned, is integrity. This means you can basically rely on the fact that the data you have will still be unchanged at a later point in time when you want to access it or if you want to process it further. In other words, there have been no changes due to technical defects or attackers. And I can rely on the fact that the data is still unchanged. The best way to compare this is, for example, when you leave the house in the morning and upon returning in the evening, realize that you didn't lock the door properly. Then you can't really know whether someone was in your apartment or if you just forgot and nothing happened at all. And if the door was locked, let's say, then the security objective of integrity has also been fulfilled. But these security objectives are just examples. There can also be others depending on what is important to you. For example, the protection of privacy or the traceability of actions and information. Those could also be security objectives, although the major international standards on which ISMS are based usually refer to these 3 security objectives. Speaking of standards, an ISMS is usually based on standards, or at least it is recommended, because these standards, which are developed by major international organizations, often already have this systematic and holistic approach. For example, you can say, okay, I'll take this existing framework and apply it to my company. And then I know, okay, everything that's in this framework, I can basically go through step by step. And then I already know, okay, I've thought of everything. It's basically like having a kind of template or guideline. This and that are things I should take into account when I'm tackling the topic of information security or ISMS. And then you can basically say, okay, that's it. And maybe that's not even that relevant or important for me right now. I mean, that's really about implementation at that point. Otherwise, you basically see a list. This is what belongs to a comprehensive ISMS. Basically, everything is included. There are different standards for this. For example, there's ISO 27001, which is the internationally recognized standard that is known all over the world. There are industry-specific standards, for example, the VDA ISA, also known as the TISAX catalog. And that's especially the case in the automotive industry. There's a separate standard, for example, from the German BSI called the BSI Basic Protection Compendium. It's also based on the ISO standard, but it's basically the BSI's own interpretation. So what is an ISMS actually about? Basically, all areas within a company where information security plays a role are covered. Information security doesn't just mean typical IT security, because information can also exist, for example, in paper form. That means this is also taken into account in the ISMS. Relevant topics here include, for example, access control. That means who has access to which data, when, which department, which managers, which employees, which groups. There is information, for example, that should be accessible to all employees is relevant, or also the general regulations regarding this. Of course, it's also about system security. That means the laptops, computers, servers that exist in the company, as well as cloud services, where and how data is stored. Networks are also included, and possibly externally used connections as well. All of this is taken into account. And above all of this are, so to speak, the business processes that also process this information. That means I also look at the whole thing holistically, and I ask, for the respective business process, in order to maintain a core activity in the company, which components are important for that, for example. At which points do I also need to protect the information that is processed in this business process? That means, for example, if I have customer data and I have it in a database, then I need to take care of the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure, the servers on which this data is stored. I need to know who has access to which data. Access. I also have the employees accordingly, and the staff is also an important pillar in information security. That means according to which rules or how is the staff trained, according to which rules to process the information. That plays an important role. And how does it continue from there? That is, with which connections, or do I perhaps have a manufacturing business, a service, or whatever it is that I offer? So what else is needed for that? That means where do the information flows need to go accordingly? Where do they need to be available? All of this is essentially understood as a business process in information security. And in the end, or rather once I have implemented basic measures, I also take another look at the risk assessment. That means I consider what risks could affect this business process, as they say, that could endanger it, and how can I ideally already prepare for them in advance. That means I may have emergency plans in place. I have previously considered which scenario would have what kind of impact on the business process. That means how often could it happen, for example, that an employee provides information to the wrong customer? Or what consequences would that have, for example, in terms of data protection or something else? What would I then have to do so that all these considerations have already taken place in advance and I can think about how serious it is and what I could do about it? That doesn't mean I have to completely eliminate all risks. In the end, I can't really do that anyway. The point is to make them measurable and manageable. That means I have thought in advance about what risks exist, what I want to do about them, or maybe I even want to accept them by saying I am aware of this risk. But I don't want to take any measures right now because they are too much effort for me at the moment, or I don't consider the risk, the potential damage that could result to be so high that I think it's worth implementing a measure against it right now, or something like that. That is, basically all of this is also covered by the ISMS. Who exactly in the company is responsible for what? In most cases, there is an information security officer or information security manager in English, and this person in turn takes care of these matters. He manages the ISMS, but that doesn't mean that he personally implements everything himself. It is still the case, for example, that there is a system administrator for the servers who, let's say, takes care of the normal operations, making sure the business processes run smoothly. And if there are now additional requirements from information security, then these are mandated by the information security manager. And the respective administrator then has to take care of them. This is also referred to as a separation of roles, meaning the information security officer or manager should not be the one who implements it as well. So it often takes on the character of information security. An ISMS is basically seen as a project, but that's not what it is. It's actually a process, an ongoing process. Every day there are new scenarios that can impact information security, and all of this is incorporated into the ISMS. That means the ISMS is truly something designed to be permanent. And with it, I want to ensure and safeguard information security in my company on an ongoing basis. So it's not something I just do once, and it's not like it's finished after 3 months. Instead, you have to keep it going continuously. So how do I actually implement all of this? There's what's called the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. In the planning phase, I first determine what exactly do I want to achieve and what measures might be available to actually implement this accordingly. This also includes specifying which measures are relevant in my company in particular, because that's what will really be effective. So it doesn't really help to just Google something and then say, okay, that's how you could do it. And that's how I'm going to do it now. It's much more about how I can achieve the goal I've set for myself. For example, I want to be resilient against hacker attacks, against crypto Trojans or something like that. How can I make that happen? And of course, there are different approaches to this. For example, I can further restrict user rights, which basically means fewer users who could be compromised, that is taken over by an attacker, so that they would be able to deploy this crypto Trojan so that it basically turns a file from the customer database into an encrypted file and you minimize that risk. You can also say that you further secure the accounts, for example, by requiring two-factor authentication, which can be very effective. But then you also have to see what fits the situation. So with two-factor authentication, for example, you always have to consider the effort involved. Do I already have a device perhaps that I can use for two-factor authentication? That is, does every employee have a smartphone that can be used? An authenticator is available where I then have to confirm my login. Can I adjust the password policy accordingly with the programs I use where the customer data is stored? Are the necessary conditions in place there to support two-factor authentication? These are all things you naturally have to consider, and they belong in this planning section. In the DO phase, it's then about actually implementing the measures. That means I look at the respective responsibilities, system administrator, network administrator, or also specialized applications, including cloud services. Who is responsible for what? And then I can say, okay, the whole thing should be implemented within 4 weeks. First, the initial measures, and then we see, okay, did everything work as planned? Were there any problems? Are there perhaps additional components that need to be procured, etc.? And then you can check that accordingly as well. In the check phase, it's about seeing whether everything has worked. That means, has an effective implementation been achieved with regard to my original problem? In other words, am I now effectively protected, for example, against crypto Trojans? Or I could have set myself the goal, because in the past I have increasingly had the case where employees lost their laptops and there were hundreds of files stored on them, or something like that. That I have now implemented measures to prevent this. Or for example, I could say I set up a system on company laptops with which I can remotely, that is from a distance, erase them. And then you could say, okay, if they get lost, I could delete the data. And then the data would no longer be available to an attacker. In the check phase, I can then see, okay, with the measure I implemented, for example, a mobile device management system, have I now achieved this goal, or is there still something missing? It could also be that I haven't installed it on all computers yet. Implement it because there's a different operating system, or it's too old for this, or something like that, which I would say can lead in this do phase to me not actually achieving the goal I wanted, something I might not have even known at the beginning. And that's what the check phase is about now. In the ACT phase, it's again about looking at how I can optimize the whole thing. That means, how do I need to adjust my planned process in order to see how I can really achieve the original goal. So to stick with the example, can I possibly replace the old devices with new ones? Do I need another solution that is also supported by the old devices? All sorts of things in that direction can be considered in this example. And this Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA cycle can now be applied to all my measures accordingly. That means everything that in some way plays a role in the ISMS, everything I've set for myself. It's not just technical measures like mobile device management, system and network security. It can be anything, meaning also trainings. I can write policies. I have to make them available somewhere for all employees. They have to understand them. They have to apply them. How can I best design this? That means that every employee really implements this in their own field of work accordingly and can integrate it into their, let's say, normal daily business routine. That's why it's always recommended not to make it too complicated, but rather to keep it realistic and practical, so that information security, especially when it's newly introduced in a company, isn't seen as an additional hurdle, like I do my job, and now on top of that I have to do what information security requires of me. From the new ISMS, but rather I just look at how I can use the existing work processes. And maybe also take a closer look, so to speak, under the hood. How can I adapt things so that information security is ensured, that the requirements I've set for myself from the ISMS are met without making too many changes to the regular business processes? So to sum up, what are the advantages of such an ISMS? I can make my risks manageable. I know exactly what it's about. I also have an overview where I can say these and those measures, these and those topics, which are relevant for information security, I've already handled well in my company, and maybe these others not yet. Even if I don't have them, I know what risks could potentially arise as a result, and I also know how I can deal with these risks. Additionally, I can meet compliance requirements. For example, requirements from the NIS2 directive or the EU General Data Protection Regulation, where I also have to address information security to this extent, and an ISMS is a good tool for that. On the other hand, I also know exactly what might come my way. That means, especially because of this risk assessment, if such a case occurs, it is no longer a surprise for me. And I'm not left wondering how I, as a company, can react now, how I can basically continue my business operations, but instead I know exactly, okay, I might already have an emergency plan for this, and I know exactly, okay, I've already run through this risk before. I know exactly what it's about, and that's why I can act accordingly now. This is also referred to as resilience, meaning the company remains able to act even when such scenarios occur. And last but not least, I can of course also increase the trust of my customers or business partners. That means if I can also prove that I have established an effective ISMS, there are often extra points for that as well. Especially when it comes to certifications. That is, if I build my ISMS according to one of these international standards, there is often the possibility to have it certified. That means an external auditor would then come to my company and check whether all the points from this audit catalog, from this set of standards, are actually fulfilled. And then I would receive a certificate confirming that I have done so. As a company, I have implemented everything accordingly. With this certificate, I can then present myself to my customers or business partners. This is especially important in supplier management. For example, if my company is a supplier to a large corporation, it is often appreciated in cooperation if I can say, look, I have proof, an externally confirmed proof, that information security is ensured in my company. And with that, I have a corresponding competitive advantage. An ISMS is therefore a foundation for information security in a company. It brings structure to the topic of information security and also makes the whole thing manageable. You can find more videos like this on information security and compliance on our channel. Feel free to subscribe.